When the grid collapses and your phone becomes nothing more than a useless brick in your hand, what's your plan? When the power stations go dark, the cell towers fail, and every electronic device you've ever relied on turns into dead weight, how will you communicate with the people you need to reach? Most people have never even considered this question, and that ignorance could cost them everything when disaster strikes. If you're serious about surviving when the world goes silent, subscribe now, because what you're about to learn could be the difference between life and death when communication becomes impossible for everyone else. Communication isn't just convenient, it's survival. In every major disaster throughout history, from hurricanes to earthquakes to societal collapse, the ability to send and receive information has determined who lived and who didn't. When Hurricane Katrina devastated New Orleans in 2005, thousands of people were stranded not because they couldn't physically escape, but because they had no way to coordinate rescue, no way to know where help was coming from, no way to tell their families they were alive. When the power grid failed across the northeastern United States in 2003, affecting 50 million people, the communication breakdown created chaos that lasted for days. People couldn't call for help, couldn't warn others about dangers, couldn't organize community responses. The lesson is clear. Without communication, you're isolated, vulnerable, and at the mercy of circumstances you can't control. But here's what most preppers get wrong. They stockpile batteries, they buy expensive ham radios that need constant charging, they rely on technology that's only as good as the power source feeding it. When that power source dies, and it will die, all that equipment becomes worthless. What you need are communication devices that function regardless of infrastructure, regardless of batteries, regardless of whether civilization is functioning or not. These aren't theoretical concepts or science fiction fantasies. These are real, proven technologies that have kept people connected through wars, natural disasters, and complete societal breakdowns. Some are ancient, some are ingeniously modern, but all of them share one critical feature. They work when everything else fails. The first device that belongs in every serious prepper's arsenal is the hand crank emergency radio, but not just any model. You need to understand exactly what makes one truly reliable versus the cheap versions that will fail you when it matters most. A proper hand crank radio uses a dynamo generator that converts your mechanical energy directly into electrical power, storing it in an internal capacitor or small rechargeable battery that holds just enough charge for immediate use. The best models can generate enough power with 1 minute of cranking to provide 30 minutes of radio reception. But here's the critical detail most people miss. The quality of the dynamo mechanism determines whether this device will work after years of storage or break down after a few uses. Look for radios with metal gears in the crank mechanism, not plastic. Plastic gears strip and fail under stress, especially in cold weather. The Eaton FRX5BT and the Kaito KA500 are two models that use robust metal components and have proven themselves in actual emergency situations, not just marketing claims. Why does this matter for communication? Because a hand crank radio with NOAA weatherband and AM/FM capabilities gives you access to emergency broadcasts, weather warnings, and any information that authorities or other survivors might be transmitting. During the 2011 Japanese tsunami, hand crank radios became lifelines for thousands of survivors who had no other way to receive information about radiation dangers from Fukushima, evacuation routes, or rescue operations. These weren't people who forgot to charge their phones. The entire infrastructure was destroyed. But radio waves kept traveling, and anyone with a hand crank radio could receive them. Some models also include shortwave bands, which can pick up transmissions from hundreds or even thousands of miles away when conditions are right. This isn't just receiving information, it's maintaining awareness of the larger situation when you're completely cut off from normal communication channels. The second device is something that sounds almost primitive until you understand its power: a signal mirror. Before you dismiss this as too simple or too limited, consider this fact. A properly used signal mirror can be seen from up to 50 miles away under clear conditions, and it requires absolutely zero power, no maintenance, and never fails. Military aviators have used signal mirrors to communicate distress and location for over a century because they work when radios are destroyed, when batteries are dead, when every other option has failed. The ACR C-strobe survivor signal mirror and the SOL rescue flash. Signal mirror are built to military specifications with aiming systems that let you precisely direct reflected sunlight toward aircraft, rescue teams, or other survivors at extreme distances. Here's how this becomes actual communication, not just signaling. Morse code, that supposedly obsolete system that most people think died with the telegraph, becomes incredibly powerful when combined with a signal mirror. 3 short flashes, 3 long flashes, 3 short flashes, SOS. Everyone recognizes it. But beyond that basic distress call, anyone who's learned even basic Morse code can transmit messages. Where you are, what you need, whether you're injured, whether there are others with you, whether there's danger approaching. During World War II, downed pilots used signal mirrors with Morse code to communicate with rescue aircraft when their radios were destroyed. They transmitted grid coordinates, information about enemy positions, and status updates using nothing but reflected sunlight. In a survival scenario where you need to communicate across distances and radio equipment has failed or been lost, a signal mirror with Morse code knowledge becomes an incredibly effective tool. It works in daylight. It works silently without revealing your position to threats that might intercept radio signals. And it never runs out of power because the sun is your energy source. But communication isn't always about distance. Sometimes you need to send messages across terrain, through areas you can't safely traverse, or to people who might pass through an area after you've left. This is where the third device becomes critical, the drop message system, which isn't a single device but a method that requires understanding and preparation. Waterproof document cases, geocaching containers, and weatherproof writing materials create a communication network that functions completely independent of technology. Military special operations units use this exact method in hostile territory, where electronic communication could be intercepted or compromised. They leave messages in prearranged locations, using codes that only their team understands. These aren't casual notes. They're precise communications about routes taken, dangers encountered, resources found, and directions for rendezvous points. The practical application for preppers is straightforward, but requires planning before disaster strikes. You establish predetermined locations with people in your group or family, specific landmarks or geographic features that everyone knows. These become your drop points. Inside weatherproof containers, you leave messages using either plain text or simple substitution codes that your group has memorized. The Write in the Rain. All-weather notebooks and Pelican micro cases create a system that survives rain, flooding, extreme temperatures, and years of exposure. During the Bosnian War in the 1990s, when the city of Sarajevo was under siege and all electronic communication was cut off, survivors used exactly this method to coordinate within the city and communicate with the outside world. They left messages in rubble, in destroyed buildings, in locations that had meaning before the war. Rescue workers and aid groups learned these systems and checked drop points regularly. People who would have died without information about safe routes, about where food distributions were happening, about which areas were being shelled, survived because someone left a waterproof message in a prearranged location. The fourth device takes us back to mechanical ingenuity: semaphore flags. These aren't relics or historical curiosities. They're a communication system that works across distances up to several miles with nothing but 2 flags and human eyesight, and in some conditions with binoculars, that range extends dramatically. Naval vessels used semaphore flags as primary communication well into the 20th century, and they're still taught to sailors today as a backup system because they function when every electronic system has failed. 2 flags, usually measuring 18 inches square in bright contrasting colors, held in different positions, represent letters, numbers, and common words. An experienced semaphore operator can transmit messages at roughly 5 words per minute, which might sound slow until you remember that 5 words per minute is infinitely faster than 0 words per minute when you have no other options. The brilliance of semaphore isn't just that it works without power. It's that it's visual communication that doesn't rely on line-of-sight technology that can fail. You don't need clear atmospheric conditions like you might for light signals. You don't need darkness like you might for fire signals. You just need someone on the other end who knows the system and can see you. During the D-Day invasion in World War II, semaphore flags coordinated landing operations when radio communications were jammed or compromised. Ships communicated with shore positions, units coordinated movements, and critical information moved between forces using nothing but people waving flags in specific patterns. The military still includes semaphore training because there are scenarios where it remains the most reliable option. For preppers, learning semaphore takes perhaps a week of practice to become functional and a month to become proficient. That's a tiny investment of time for a communication capability that literally never fails as long as you have flags and visibility. The fifth device is perhaps the most sophisticated on this list while still requiring zero external power: the mechanical encryption device. Specifically something like the Enigma-style cipher wheels, or modern equivalents like the cipher wheel from Crypto Museum. These allow you to send written messages that are completely secure even if intercepted, and they work entirely through mechanical rotation of disks with no batteries, no electronics, no power requirements whatsoever. You might wonder why encryption matters in a survival scenario, and the answer is critical. In any prolonged disaster or collapse scenario, information security becomes survival security. If you're leaving messages at drop points, if you're communicating locations of supplies, safe routes, or group positions, you absolutely do not want hostile parties to intercept and understand those messages. The genius of mechanical encryption is that it's mathematically unbreakable without the key, while being completely independent of technology. The cipher wheels work through a substitution system where the alignment of wheels determines how each letter gets encrypted. Change the starting position, and the same message encrypts completely differently. Your group memorizes or carries small cards with the daily wheel positions, and suddenly all your written communications become meaningless to anyone else. During World War II, mechanical encryption devices protected military communications even when messages were intercepted. The Germans used Enigma machines, the Allies used other cipher systems, and all of them functioned purely through mechanical rotation of wheels and gears. No power required. A modern prepper can use similar systems, much simpler than military-grade devices, that still provide effective security for written messages. The CSA cipher set and basic cipher wheels, available from educational suppliers, create a system where your group can leave encrypted messages that protect operational security while maintaining communication capability. Now let's talk about the integration of these systems, because that's where real communication resilience comes from. You don't rely on just one method. You create layered communication capabilities that work in different scenarios and support each other. Your hand crank radio gives you information from the outside world and lets you monitor any organized rescue or recovery efforts. Your signal mirror provides long-distance visual communication for distress calls or coordination with distant groups. Your drop message system creates asynchronous communication that doesn't require both parties to be present simultaneously. Your semaphore flags enable real-time visual communication across moderate distances when you can maintain line of sight. Your mechanical encryption protects all written messages from hostile interception. Together, these 5 devices create a communication network that functions completely independent of power infrastructure, cellular networks, internet connectivity, or any other system that will fail when disaster strikes. But having the devices isn't enough, and this is where most people fail in their preparation. You need to practice these systems before you need them. Signal mirrors seem simple until you try to aim reflected sunlight at a specific target a mile away and realize it requires skill and practice. Semaphore looks easy until you try to read flags from half a mile away and discover that speed and accuracy come only with repetition. Morse code sounds straightforward until you attempt to transmit a message under stress and find that you can't remember the patterns. Drop message systems work brilliantly until you realize that choosing actual secure locations and creating codes that are memorable but not obvious requires thought and planning. Mechanical encryption is foolproof until you try to use it quickly and discover that unfamiliarity with the mechanism makes you fumble when you need speed. The solution is training exercises with your family or survival group. Set up scenarios where normal communication is prohibited and you must use only these off-grid methods. Practice sending messages via semaphore across your property. Use signal mirrors to communicate with a partner positioned a mile away. Encrypt and decrypt messages using your cipher wheels until the process becomes automatic. Establish real drop points in your area and practice leaving and retrieving messages. Monitor your hand crank radio regularly, learning which stations broadcast emergency information and what frequencies might carry useful intelligence in a crisis. This practice isn't paranoia, it's preparation. When the actual emergency arrives, when stress is high and conditions are chaotic, you will default to what you've practiced. If you've never used these systems before the crisis hits, you won't use them effectively when it matters. Consider the historical precedent. Every military force in history has drilled communication protocols endlessly because they know that communication breakdown causes more failures than enemy action. Roman legions practiced signal flag systems until soldiers could coordinate complex maneuvers across miles of battlefield with nothing but visual signals. Native American tribes developed smoke signal systems so sophisticated they could transmit complex messages across hundreds of miles using nothing but fire and timing. Arctic explorers created cairn systems, stacked stones that marked routes and contained written messages that saved subsequent expeditions from death when weather and equipment failures eliminated all other options. None of these people practiced these systems because it was fun. They practiced because they knew their survival depended on communication, and they knew that the most reliable communication methods were the ones that required no technology that could fail. There's another dimension to this that preppers need to understand: psychological resilience. When disaster strikes and modern communication fails, the psychological impact of isolation can be as dangerous as any physical threat. People make catastrophically bad decisions when they feel completely cut off from information and from other people. They panic, they take unnecessary risks, they abandon good plans because they feel alone and desperate. But if you have communication capability, even if it's just the ability to signal a distant group with a mirror or leave messages at a drop point, that sense of connection provides psychological stability that keeps you thinking clearly. During the siege of Sarajevo, survivors later reported that the ability to send and receive messages, even simple ones, was sometimes more important for maintaining hope and sanity than the actual information content of those messages. Knowing that communication was possible, that they weren't completely isolated, that someone might receive their signal or read their message, kept people functioning when despair would have destroyed them. The technological sophistication of modern communication has made us fragile. We've become dependent on systems that are incredibly powerful, but also incredibly vulnerable. A solar flare, an electromagnetic pulse, a sustained power grid failure, a widespread natural disaster, or societal collapse could eliminate every method of communication that most people have ever used. Cell phones become paperweights. Internet connectivity becomes a memory. Even traditional radio requires power sources that eventually deplete. But a signal mirror works just as well in a post-apocalyptic wasteland as it does today. Semaphore flags function identically whether civilization is intact or destroyed. Mechanical encryption devices protect messages in any scenario. Drop message systems work regardless of what's happened to infrastructure. Hand crank radios generate power from human energy that's always available as long as you're alive. This isn't about rejecting modern technology. It's about understanding that resilience comes from redundancy and from having capabilities that function across the entire spectrum of possible scenarios. Use your cell phone while it works. Use internet communication while the infrastructure supports it. Use powered radio equipment while you have electricity. But know with absolute certainty that when all of those systems fail, you have communication methods that will continue functioning. That knowledge isn't just practical, it's empowering. You're not at the mercy of fragile systems. You're not dependent on infrastructure that could vanish overnight. You have capabilities that work regardless of circumstances, and that makes you genuinely prepared instead of just equipped. The investment required for these off-grid communication devices is minimal compared to most prepping expenses. A quality hand crank radio costs between $50 and $100. A military-grade signal mirror costs $20 to $40. Semaphore flags can be made from bright fabric for less than $10, or purchased as a set for around $30. Waterproof message containers and all-weather writing materials cost perhaps $50 for a complete system. Basic mechanical cipher wheels cost between $15 and $50 depending on sophistication. For less than $300 total, you can establish communication capabilities that function indefinitely without any external power source, that require no ongoing costs, And that will work when systems that cost thousands of dollars have all failed. But beyond the devices themselves, invest time in learning the skills. Study Morse code until you can read and transmit at least 10 words per minute. Practice semaphore until you can send and receive basic messages without constant reference to position charts. Learn basic radio operation and understand how different frequencies behave under various atmospheric conditions. Master the use of signal mirrors so you can acquire targets quickly and maintain aim even in challenging conditions. Develop encryption protocols with your group that balance security with usability. This knowledge costs nothing except time, and it's more valuable than any physical device because skills never break, never run out of power, and can't be lost or stolen. There are some who will read this and think it's excessive, that modern communication is reliable enough that these backup systems are unnecessary. Those people have never experienced real infrastructure failure. They've never been in a situation where every assumption about connectivity and information access suddenly became invalid. They've never felt the isolation and vulnerability that comes when you realize that you have no way to call for help, no way to warn others, no way to coordinate with family or group members, no way to receive information about what's happening beyond your immediate surroundings. Until you've experienced that helplessness, it's easy to assume it won't happen. But it does happen. It has happened throughout history. It's happening somewhere in the world right now. And when it happens to you, the only question that matters is whether you prepared for it or not. The people who survive major disasters aren't the ones with the most gear or the biggest stockpiles. They're the ones who maintained capabilities that others lost. They're the ones who could still communicate when everyone else went silent. They're the ones who could coordinate, share information, call for help, warn others, and maintain connections that kept groups functioning as units instead of fragmenting into isolated individuals. Communication is force multiplication in survival scenarios. A group that can communicate effectively is exponentially more capable than the sum of its individual members. A group that loses communication capability fragments into individuals who are each dramatically more vulnerable. So here's what you do next. Acquire these 5 types of off-grid communication devices. Don't just buy them and store them away. Learn to use them. Practice with them. Integrate them into exercises with your family or survival group. Establish protocols and procedures so everyone knows what communication methods to use in different scenarios. Create backup plans for your backup plans. Memorize key information like Morse code patterns, semaphore positions, and encryption keys so you're not dependent on written references that could be lost or destroyed. Make communication capability as fundamental to your preparation as food, water, and shelter, because in many scenarios it's equally critical to survival. And if you want to go deeper, you'll find in the pinned comment some guides and documents that can take your preparedness to the next level, including detailed semaphore charts, Morse code training materials, and protocols for establishing secure drop message systems. Check them out when you're ready. But more importantly, start practicing now. Don't wait until the crisis arrives to discover whether you can actually use these systems under pressure. The time to learn is when the stakes are low, and you have the luxury of making mistakes without consequences. If you're serious about maintaining communication capability when infrastructure fails, subscribe now and commit to building these skills before you need them. Share this with the people in your survival group, because communication is only useful when everyone in your network has the capability. Like this video if you understand that real preparedness means having systems that work when everything else fails. Comment below with which of these communication devices you're going to acquire first. The grid will fail eventually. The only question is whether you'll still be able to communicate when it does.